told you that the critics continue for 3.5 years, the most creative experience in my life. I love those guys. They had 18 different musicians in the band over 3.5 years. All fantastic. Quickly, I'll tell you that in the book, I'm not going to talk about San Diego tonight, but I moved to San Diego with Helen in 1983, and I became a concert promoter. As much as I couldn't stand Chuck Morris, I went into his line of work anyway. Actually, Chuck was so helpful. I mean, on the back, the endorsements, it says something about how Chuck picked my brain relentlessly for years when he was doing Talagi's in Pittsfield, and I was happy to help. And then little did he know that I'd become a concert promoter and pick his brain for years. In the book, I've had many amazing experience with Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Aretha Franklin, Miles Davis, Roy Orbison, James Brown, Joan Baez, Bonnie Raitt, Lyle Lovett, Boulder's own Richie Furay, Whitney Houston. Again, they're fantastic stories and very well written, so I hope you get a chance to read the book. I want to acknowledge my publisher and editor and book designer, Boulder's own Sandra Jonas, who took me on. Sandra has started her own publishing house, Sandra Jonas Publishing House, and I'm the guinea pig. I mean, this is her first release. She designed the cover, the entire interior of the book. She did an incredible job, and happy birthday. Sandra's working on her birthday tonight, so I won't make the crowd sing to you. And for the Q&A, we'll do a quick Q&A. Thanks so much for coming. It's seeing almost every face is someone I know and love. I kept it together, sort of. I'd like to bring up one of my dearest friends for the past 40 years or so. I've known him since he was a 20-year-old record reviewer in Arvada. He went on to wear every hat in the music business, including 26 years as the music critic for the Denver Post. He's written several books himself, including Colorado Rocks, and has a few more ready to go to press. You'll be seeing them shortly in the next year ahead. And he was a great radio guy in KCUV, one of the last progressive voices in Denver. Please welcome my friend G. Brown.
Come on down. Are you going to sit?
Give him some water, G.
Yes.
Is it okay if I stand? Yeah. Are you hearing me? Okay. I'm just leading it off with a couple of questions, and then I'll come out and you can operate this thing. But
is that on? I don't think it's not on.
it's not on?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Just talk loud.
So that,
Yeah? Yeah.
I'm just going to project.
Yeah. Okay.
If that's okay. So yeah, we'll ask Kenny some questions, but I'm just so proud of him getting this book done because it's hard. Writing's hard. My favorite quote is from Red Smith. Kenny and I are both sports fans. The famous New York Times sports writer said, "Writing is easy. You just open a vein and bleed." He sums it up. But there's different kinds of writing, right? There's I'm versed in reporting. You write any sort of fiction, you have to have an imagination and a sense of structure. But to write a memoir has to have its own set of challenges. I would assume having that candor. I mean, you're kind of a private person to my experience, so for you to write this, you allude to writing about family and co-workers. What were the challenges for that?
Well, the challenge was really, it was being honest. First of all, it took me nearly 8 years to write this book, and I don't think I said this leading in, but I gave up on the book. At one point, my father was dying a slow death in New Jersey, and I was going back and forth from San Diego for many years. It was really sad, and I sort of gave up. I had written the first draft. My father read it, and his quote was, "Well, you're a good writer, but it's no bestseller." Thanks, Dad. And I basically had given up on the book. It was really, I have to get this in there. The worst question that you can ask a writer is how's the book coming? Yeah, you writers out there will understand what I'm saying. It's just, you want it to end, but it never ends. You never finish the book. And G asked me that question repeatedly. We talk every couple of months on the phone, and I said, G, I finally said, G, I've given up on it. And he said, I'm not letting that happen. I'm just not letting that happen. I said, well, it's dead in the water. My creative flame is out, and just went through this heaviness with my father. And G said, let me introduce you to this woman I know named Sandra Jonas. And that's, now Sandra has a publishing house, and I'm the maiden voyage. But writing a memoir, first of all, there's a lot of stuff in here about my family. And I ran it all by them because our family had its share of dysfunction. It had its share of a little bit of controversy. At one point, believe it or not, Nicole, my stepdaughter, who I've been with since she was 7, our grandchildren are ages 28, 26, and 16, and the 28-year-old Shira, who's a fundraiser, a real aggressive go-getter, in Washington, D.C., she read the book, and she called Helen and said, Grandma, how could you have stayed with him? and she loves me. She's the apple in my eye, but she read the book. So, just being honest, there are people in my life that were kind of scumbags, and I changed a bunch of names. Most of the names are real in the book, but when you get to the part about people in the concert business, people that brought me out to San Diego to do this, and kind of the stuff that I had to go through, I changed their names, and a lot of them are still alive, and I'm actually friends with some of them. And I had to call each of them and explain to them this book's coming out. It was a pivotal point in my life. I felt compelled to write about this, but I changed your name because you would be embarrassed and humiliated. I said, but no one looks worse in this book than I do. So that was always my trump card, that I look worse than anyone in this book. But in terms of writing a memoir, you just have to close your eyes and go for it. You can't hold back. I won't mention the person's name, but there's another Coloradoan that wrote a rock and roll memoir, and it's all fluff. It was enjoyable reading, but a lot of it's embellished and not true. I tried to be as honest as I could.
Very good. The thing I appreciate about Kenny's book is it's kind of divided up into 3 parts for me. There's the early coming-of-age stuff, which a lot has been done for our generation, but for Kenny to come up, several people have mentioned the fresh take on attending Woodstock, and that's high praise. The last third, his days as a promoter, he tells a lot of stories about the stars he intersected with, and we love that salacious stuff, obviously. But the middle part is about Boulder, and we all get it in this room. Being in Boulder in the 70s was like being nowhere else on earth. I always thought it would be romantic to be in Los Angeles maybe in the 20s and 30s, or San Francisco in the 40s and 50s, or Berkeley in the 60s. Boulder in the 70s, I think, was right up there, and no one's chronicled that until now. So that's kind of a cool thing. Was there a sense of responsibility that you felt in terms of telling that story? Did you feel that gravitas of what transpired then?
Not really.
Okay, I was a
I think my love for Boulder comes across in this book, and that I mean, like I said, it's a love story to my wife and kids, and it's a love story to music. And I stayed in Boulder despite not having work, despite being underpaid. I stayed here for 12 years, and I was inspired. I don't think that this is the definitive history of Boulder music. Boulder's, the Boulder music scene in the 70s is part of what I wrote. But I think it's up to you, G.
Ask me how the book's coming.
No, how are the 2 books coming? I wouldn't ask you. I don't know what kind of question it was. But I really think that had I set out, with a responsibility to chronicle the Boulder music scene, I would have done more in depth. I mean, I skim over it and say, who was great But it was mostly about, you know, me hanging with Chuck Morris and you at Talahi's. And I wish I could take credit for, you know, feeling that responsibility.
Well, but you hit some notes in there, so a great part of the book.
I love Boulder.
How about some questions for Kenny?
Yeah, I love your story about Bob and him calling you into the station. So you had 15 minutes. I'm dying to know, what was the first thing you ever played on the
Oh, I think I wrote about it. You know, if I can remember, it was Bob Dylan, Rainy Day Women 12 and 35 was the first song I ever played on the radio. And then I played, you know, I really got lazy because I had to scuffle and learn how to do the equipment. So I played Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, which was 11 minutes and 19 seconds. Bought me plenty of time that day.
Jimmy, how much does of your success owes to having an eidetic memory of every detail there?
Well, I do have a pretty good memory. I haven't lost it yet. But I'm a journalist, journal guy. I kept journals. I was telling Chuck Morris before that he has not chronicled every act he's put on at Talahi's, but I've chronicled every act that I ever saw there, which has got to be 60 or 70 a year for several years. So now I have to, you know, send a list to Chuck. A lot of the book was written from journals. A lot of the book was from my memory. And people that have read the book already, a couple of people have said, boy, your sense of hyperbole is ridiculous. You know? And I go, no, show me where. And a couple of people pointed out things that I said that I might have embellished. I don't think so, but yeah, thanks for asking.
Carl Worthington,
Oh, hi, Carl.
I worked in the office right below Bob Wilkinson from 61 to 67, actually even longer than that. And I also was an announcer in the 60s. And my big question is, because I went through the same experience with you, I would screw up. I'm doing classical music, but I'm an architect, and I'm drawing, and I forget the thing's running, and it's click wrong, click wrong, and oh, Christ. Wilkinson's on the phone from Walt Roberts' house. Carl, what in the hell are you doing? Not only is it over, but you played the last two movements first. But the question is, when did you get Bob to transition from classical, which when I was with him all through the 60s, it was nothing but classical. One of the biggest collections on the planet. The most eccentric guy, as you said, on the planet.
Ever.
So when did he begin to transition into rock and other modes? That was an era that I was too busy in the 70s, I guess, to keep up with that. And how did that transition from late 60s?
It was slightly before my time. I started in September of '71. Jason Sherman is here, who was the person that...
Well, there's a guy named Junior that had cotangent up on the hill, and Super Warthog, another guy. They had been involved in Denver in starting this kind of radio, this freeform radio. And Bob wasn't making much money, by the way, with classical music. So these hippies, I mean die-hard hippies, came to Bob about 68 and a half or so, or maybe early 69, and said, just let us play our kind of music from 6 in the morning until 6 at night, and then you can go back to classical. So if you can imagine, it went from Led Zeppelin to Beethoven. And then if the guy didn't show up, by the way, he would be at the Broken Drum drinking. He had this beautiful voice, but he would show up late. And so here I am at 6, I'm a rock and roll guy. I'd have to announce the classical music. And I would butcher, all of these names. And the diehards would call me up and scream at me for, you don't know how to say that, guy, and stuff like that. But eventually, I just wanted to say one thing, too, about Kenny. The funny part about that, I started $1.25 an hour, so when I was. And then we would try to do commercials and stuff like that. But what would happen is we're broke. Your car needs to be fixed. So you would go to the guy and say, I'll tell you what, I'll trade you radio commercials for fixing my car. Boulder's been a great bartering place, for a long time. Well, Bob would leave town. Usually there would be 2 commercials an hour. There were like 25. All the DJs, because we're getting all of our stuff taken care of that we can't afford. And Bob would never understand when he got back. All these commercials, so that was fun. The other thing is we did reports, talk about freeform. I would say, that chocolate mescaline going around isn't really very good, but nothing wrong with the window pane. And he would say stuff like that and do lost reports of dogs and goats and everything in the foothills because it went, up to the foothills. And it was fabulous. It was really the most fun, like he said. One other quick thing about Kenny, and I haven't read this part yet. We had a strange thing of how you got a shift on KRNW. You would hang out at the radio station, and then there was a kind of a pecking order in who was ever next got the next shift that was open. I was lucky I got a job at PBS, Channel 6, communications major, radio, television, and film. There were about 3 guys ahead of you, and I don't want to play heavy rock and roll in the morning, and Kenny would fill in, and I would listen to his show, and I just loved it. I loved what he did. So I pitched for him to get the job, and believe me, those guys were really angry.
Yeah, no, I remember.
Yeah, but I was so happy. And he earned it, and he deserved it to have that shift. He took the ball and ran away with it.
2 weeks after that show that I described where I didn't know what I was doing, I was morning drive from 6 to 10, 5 days a week. So I literally had to teach myself. And Carl Worthington, meet Helen Redmond. Helen's art, the first place I ever saw Helen's art, she's a wonderful artist, was at Carl Worthington's 1309 Gallery. So we go way back in Boulder.
Swan?
You remember Bob's little Mercedes?
Yes.
Speaking of cars, yeah. My question was, I'm only this far in the book, I'm trying to get there, but Brent is not Brent's real name, right?
No, and that's all I want to say about that. But he is.
It wasn't my ex-husband, was it?
I don't think if I said Brent's real name, anyone would know who he is, but he's a central character in the book. He was a big fan of mine on KRNW. We became best friends, and then he ended up bringing me out to San Diego and putting me in the concert business. I won't say another word, but it's not his real name.
That was a really good question. Anyone else for Kenny? I know he's got a lot of books to sign. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you all.
Let's show Kenny some love.